For historian Elias Thorne, the love he shared with his wife Lena was a fact more solid than any date in a textbook. But when she disappeared, she left behind an impossible clue, a photograph of herself from 60 years before she was born. It's a trail that leads to a derelict lighthouse, a place that doesn't just watch the sea, but the terrifying flicker between the moments of time itself. The flicker. The only thing certain in Port Blossom, Maine, was the tide. It came in, it went out. For Elias Thorne, a man who made his living cataloging the dead certainties of history, that was comfort enough. The other certainty was Lena. Lena with her wild, sea spray hair and eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic. She was a marine biologist who saw the world as a vibrant, shifting ecosystem. He saw it as a collection of static moments, of stories already told. They were a paradox, and they were desperately in love. Their place was the jagged cliff overlooking the Widow's Lantern, an old lighthouse decommissioned for 50 years. It stood like a stone skeleton against the bruised purple of twilight. "It gives me the creeps," Lena had said once, hugging her knees to her chest. "They say the light wasn't for ships. They say it was a warning from the sea, not for it." Elias, ever the historian, had chuckled. "Just ghost stories, Lynn, to scare the tourists." He wished to God he'd been right. It started the day she disappeared. No fight, no note. Her car was still in the drive. Her phone was on the nightstand. It was as if she'd simply dissolved into the salt-laced air. The police were useless. A lover's quarrel, they suggested. She'd be back. But Elias knew Lena. A week bled into 2. The house grew cavernous, her scent of salt citrus fading from the pillows. Despair was a cold, physical weight in his chest. It was during his 3rd frantic search of her study that he found it, tucked inside a copy of Moby Dick, an old Polaroid. It was a photo of the Widow's Lantern. But something was wrong. The stonework was new, the lantern housing gleamed, and standing at its base, waving, was Lena. On the bottom, in her familiar scrawl, were 2 things: a date, October 19th, 1928, and a sentence that made the hair on his arms stand up. "The light doesn't show you the rocks, Eli. It shows you the when." This was the first key, the one that turned his grief into a terrifying, needle-sharp purpose. His historical research skills, once a gentle academic pursuit, became a weapon. He tore through town archives, maritime logs, and century-old newspapers. He found a pattern: disappearances, always on the night of the autumnal equinox, always during a specific, violent electrical storm. Shipwrecks on nights recorded as preternaturally calm. A lighthouse keeper in the 30s who went mad, raving about splintered time and the man in the flicker. The final piece was a small brass compass he'd given Lena for their anniversary. He found it on his desk, not hers. It was cold, unnaturally so. When he picked it up, the needle didn't spin to north. It spun wildly, then locked, pointing directly at the lighthouse. He had his map, he had his date. The next equinox storm was 2 days away. He went to the lighthouse as the sky tore open. Rain came down in sheets, and lightning spider-webbed across the black clouds. The compass in his hand felt like a shard of ice. He climbed the spiraling iron staircase, the wind screaming through the broken windows like a banshee. At the top, in the lantern room, the air was still, dead still, and cold. In the center of the room, the great crystal lens, long dark, began to emit a soft, sickly ozone glow. Elias held up the compass. The needle vibrated, humming in tune with the lens. He looked out the window, and the world outside wasn't right. The lightning flashes were no longer random. They were rhythmic, a pulse. And with each pulse, the landscape shifted. For a split second, he saw a shoreline with trees long since felled. A flash, and he saw a pier that hadn't existed for a century. A flash, and he saw, God help me, a sky filled with shapes that were not birds and not planes. The light from the lens intensified, swallowing him. It was not a journey. It was a disassembly. He was torn apart and put back together wrong. The shriek of the wind became the shriek of 1,000 moments happening at once. He smelled coal smoke and tar and something ancient and wet, like the bottom of a well. He landed hard on the stone floor. The storm was gone. Sunlight, pale and thin, streamed through the window. He stumbled outside. The world was sharper, rendered in sepia and gray. A Model T rattled down a dirt road where asphalt should have been. 1928. His adventure had begun, but the horror was just settling in. Port Blossom in 1928 was not a quaint postcard. The air was thick with a palpable dread. People hurried, their eyes downcast. They avoided the lighthouse, and he saw why. Sometimes, from the corner of his eye, reality would stutter. A man walking down the street would momentarily blur, his image splitting into a dozen after-images, like a thumb-rifled deck of cards. The flicker. This was the monster. It wasn't a beast of tooth and claw, but a sickness in time itself, and the lighthouse was its heart. He knew Lena would be smart. She'd be leaving him a trail. Using his own obsession against the monster, she'd leave historical markers. He found another Polaroid tucked into a library book on local shipping routes, this one showing a Civil War-era cannon on the bluff. The date scrawled on the back, June 4th, 1863. The compass was his only guide. He had to wait for another temporal flux, another storm in the time stream, to jump again. He spent days hiding, scrounging for food, watching the flicker claim people, a fisherman vanishing from his boat, a child's laughter echoing long after she had stuttered out of existence. He made the next jump, a jarring, violent lurch into the past. He landed in the middle of a Union Army encampment. The air smelled of mud and gunpowder. He was a ghost in their world. He found Lena's next clue carved into the cannon's breech, a simple date. Their date, the day they'd met. The compass needle spun, now pointing not to a place, but back to the future, back to his own time. He understood. She wasn't leading him on a chase through the decades. She was leading him home. She had been thrown back, and each jump was her desperate attempt to get back to him, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs across the decades. But the entity was aware of him now. As he raced back to the lighthouse, the flickering grew worse. The world warped around him. He saw figures shambling in the temporal haze, the flicker men, the echoes of those the entity had consumed. Their faces were blurred, their bodies unstuck, their mouths open in silent, eternal screams. He reached the lighthouse and scrambled up the stairs, the flicker men reaching for him with hands that passed through the stone. In the lantern room, he saw her, Lena. She was translucent, flickering in and out of existence. Eli, it's an anchor, but it's weak. It feeds on paradox. The more we travel, the more it eats. I'm getting you out, he yelled, grabbing for her. His hand met hers, and the contact was like plunging his arm into static electricity and ice. She solidified for a moment, her eyes wide open with terror and love. Together, she said. Use the compass. Think of home, our time. He held the compass aloft. He closed his eyes, ignoring the screeching chaos of the flickermen swarming the room. He didn't think of the lighthouse or the date. He thought of their little house. He thought of the smell of her hair, the sound of her laugh, the feeling of her hand in his. He poured every ounce of his love, his certainty, into that single point of focus. The light exploded. They landed on the floor of their living room. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow through the window. The air was still. The house was quiet. Lena was solid in his arms, sobbing. He held her, his own body trembling uncontrollably. They left Port Blossom the next day. They never looked back. But sometimes, in the dead of night, Elias wakes up in a cold sweat. He'll see it. Just for a second, the glass of water on his nightstand will flicker, showing 1,000 reflections of itself in 1,000 different moments. He knows love brought them back, but he also knows that the widow's lantern is still there, still hungry, and in the deep, dark waters of time, some things, once disturbed, never truly go back to sleep.